Good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is our fifth session of the Women Speaks. And if you're new to our series, this is a commitment by the Ananta Aspen Center to create a safe space for honest conversations by women leaders. Each session, if you've been following them, has been quite incredible, and we've heard women leaders share their insights, their challenges, and their aspirations. In our last session, we spoke to three dynamic women who had chosen social entrepreneurship as their life's calling. And today I'm delighted to host Aishna, Khushbu, and Rachita, three powerful women leaders from the social sector. Now, interestingly, all three of them started with what one may call conventional careers in the private sector, in technology, in communications, and then interestingly, all three of them, chose to set up education nonprofits as their calling. Aishna works with rural government schools in Karnal. Khushbu works with state governments on transforming the public school system. And Rachita is grooming a young generation of Earth ambassadors and will be soon setting up a center for eco living in the outskirts of Chennai. And I really want to start from this transition that each of you made in your lives. In some way, your stories connect with who you are and where you came from. So Aishna, I'm going to start with you. What's your story that led you to set up Varitra?
Good morning, everybody. My story actually, I'm not really sure where to start my story from, but I'll probably start it when I was 16 and I decided to move to Mumbai because I realized that I wanted to, opt for a few subjects in humanities which weren't available in my city back then. And as I studied and made my way through, I realized that I really loved human interaction. And that's something that I missed when I took a couple of my jobs in corporate sector, because even though I was working with 100 of other people, but I could not see the impact that I wanted to see. And that to me as a person was very, very important. And at my previous job where I was working with TIS Mumbai, I used to basically be a CSR advisor. I used to be in M&E and I used to visit these NGOs across India, and I used to always long to be on the other side. And that's when it caught on to me, and I decided that this is what I want to do. And then I think right before a very big promotion, I decided to quit, decided to move back to my hometown, and I picked up a few villages and started working. It's as simple as that.
Great, and I would like to know more, Aishna, but I'm going to first get on to Khushbu and Rachita to tell their stories as well. Khushbu, again, tech, the kind of stuff that parents wish their kids do and stick to it for the course of their lives, and then you decided, along with your partner, to flip it all. So what happened there?
Interesting question and a great one to start the conversation with. Good morning, everyone. Like Aishna said, I think for me, even to take up a job was pretty unconventional from the, basis the family that I came from. The conventional path, if I had to define what conventional meant for my family and the kind of background that I come from, it was like a girl completes her graduation and then gets married and that's it, Family life is the conventional one. So the sheer fact that I could complete my engineering and then I could join Wipro and Honeywell, I could continue my corporate life, that itself was pretty unconventional for me. And I think from there on, it wasn't like one day I just woke up and I said, forget corporate, I'll do this social sector. I think in hindsight, it's all about those small choices, small steps that decisions that one makes. There was always this discomfort, and especially because of the upbringing that I've had, right? I came from a very conventional, very traditional family, and my mom fought for me. She stood by me. And so when I saw these children around me here in Bangalore, struggling for basic things, you see them in tin sheds, you see them, serving in some restaurant, cafes, and then you just can't unsee them. once you have seen it, like something has hit you in your heart, and then you say, okay, what is that small plus one thing that I can do? So I started volunteering over weekends, and I started knowing these children even more better. And then I think somehow that discomfort, it just added, once I was very sure what I wanted to do, but then it always starts with you, and then it's all about the people who are around you. So I would say I was very fortunate to have those people around me who helped me make the right decisions, who challenged my perspectives and added their perspectives to it. And I think in all this while, I think my decision, my final conviction that I want to do this grew just stronger. And that's how where I am today is all because of, obviously because of the decisions that I have made, but also because of the people around me who helped me make those decisions.
Thanks, Khushbu. Rachita.
Yeah, I can't, I don't feel like I'm introducing myself as a new person, because Eshna and Khushbu already said so many parts of my story that I wouldn't reiterate. But coming from a very conventional family, the first girl to go out and study in my family, going out and studying engineering and working somewhere, staying away from parents and hometown itself was very unconventional. So what I'm doing right now is way ahead of what I thought I could do. And I think I got wings when I came to South India, because I really understood and I saw the kind of exposure that exists, which I didn't have back in Jharkhand. And I'm very deeply rooted in the natural habitat of Jharkhand, and I saw that how people surrounded with such lush forests, and Jharkhand means the land of forests, and people surrounded with such lush resources, and one of the biggest Maharatna companies are there, and people are so deprived of education, and the hunger, I just can't explain that. So those little things, like how Khushbu said, kept on coming back to my life, kept on coming back, and those did not let me have peaceful nights, and I had a lot of sleepless nights when I was working in the corporate. Although I was in technology education sector, which was partly my interest, education, but I was not making any difference as such. It gave me a very good start. It gave me a very good push to understand my strengths, that I can make a difference in education sector. Hence, I quit and I started working with my partner, who's in the wildlife sector as well. So we both started this initiative, You Can, for eco-literacy in youth and children.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rachita. One of the things that all three of you spoke about is that, Khushbu, you mentioned that you cannot unsee what you've seen, particularly when you look at how disparities are wide and now visible in India. And actually, you mentioned the need for human interaction and human engagement. How have the last 3.5 months been for all of you? You work in education that fundamentally, by definition, requires human engagement and human contact. And in some ways, how the last 3 months impacted you and your organizations? And I'd like you to talk about both the good parts and the stuff that has really been very challenging for you.
I think very rightly pointed out, a lot of our work is heavily centered around social interaction. It's got a lot to do with being with people in the moment, working with them, especially organizations working on the very grassroots. So I think the first few weeks, because nobody at that point could predict the magnitude of what was to come, it was a complete lockdown, it was complete shutdown. So everything came to a halt for us. And the schools shut. There was no way, initially there was no way to reach out to people on the field, because not all of them had, not all of the families had a phone. And those who did, to get their numbers was a big challenge. So I think to even reconnect took a few weeks. Personally, we took it in a more positive stride, saying that, okay, lockdown for a month, let's try and probably don on our thinking caps, do some re-strategization, think about this, think about new ideas. Also, it was March. It was a very crucial time of the year. It was when we were already, most of us were into planning or fundraising full time. So, we started ideating a lot, designing things and all. And then we realized that this is something which is here to stay. And especially with schools, because you cannot practice social distancing in especially schools which are so crammed with very low infrastructure. Where do you, you have 60 students crammed in a classroom. How are you going to practice social distancing? So we don't see schools opening up anytime soon. So once that sunk in, it was a different reality after that, because we saw that a lot of work that we've done over the past 2 years, it would easily go back many steps. And, most of our organization, whether it's the Khushbu's organization or Rachita's, we are trying to beat social isolation. We are working very hard on inclusion, and all of that has taken a beating now. So it's work-wise also, it's it's going to be very challenging. It has been very challenging. No matter what we are doing right now, we can't try. I think the biggest challenge that I have at least personally faced with my work is, no matter what I'm trying to do, I'm not able to reach everybody. The disparities are such that, I can say that I have digitalized content in the past 3 months to reach out to rural children and teachers, but not all of them. Not all of them have access to these, and that reality is so challenging to accept. So that's been the challenging bit of it. Positive, I think, everybody has started valuing connections and interaction, and just being there for each other, and that's something that was again something we were struggling to work with for the past few years. And for people to finally accept it, most people to accept it, to value it, has been such a positive change. My team has held the fort like anything. I never expected. They're so young, they're fresh out of college, they don't have to do this, they don't have to go through this, but the way they've been there, I think it's been also positive in bringing teams together, in just generally bringing people together. So I think people have been very, very kind to each other. So that's been the positive part of it. And I think I can go on about the challenges, but I think we pretty much all get a picture.
Thanks, Ashna. And I think that you touched upon a very, it's a very, very sobering thought that, a lot of the efforts we're making at inclusion perhaps have taken many steps backwards because of, the situation that we find ourselves in. And we're using technology, but, is it enough? And so, Khushbu, to you, is it enough? And what's it been like for you over the last 3 months? And how are you looking at this, shaping the trajectory of your work for the future?
Sure, Reshma. So to begin with, your first question, is technology enough? I think all of us know that answer. It's not enough, but I fundamentally believe that technology is something that provides us the base to build on. So at least in our work, we are operating with that mindset that what is it that we can leverage, what already exists, and if we can just leverage it to build something that can create a more equitable, more equal opportunities for children who do not have necessarily access to it today, that could be a potential, potential road towards finding a solution. In terms of what has changed for me or my organization here and the work we do, I think it's very similar to what Ashna shared. First and foremost, it was all about acceptance. Just the realization that it is not a short-term thing, it will not go away in 1 month. I think that itself was a process for all of us in the organization. And I still remember, and the timing was such that it started around March end, when each of us were already doing the next year's planning. We were thinking what new projects, what new initiatives, how to scale, how to go big. And then suddenly you have this, COVID comes knocking your door and you're like, what to do now? Schools are closed countrywide. And so I remember still that, we did our first annual exercise on Zoom. And we said, we can't say that because COVID has come, we won't interact now. Just because workplaces are shut down doesn't mean the work has stopped. And if that has not stopped, I think that whole experience of going through this planning exercise within the team also gave that belief that, maybe we can do something for our children too. If schools are closed, doesn't mean the schooling has to close. Doesn't mean the education has to stop. And so it really pushed us beyond that comfort zone. We were operating with a certain perspective, certain beliefs, and we said our why still remains the same. We are still working for enabling education for our children, but the how has to shift. Now we can't go to schools. Now we can't go and meet these people, but what else can we do? So in fact, the good thing, there are so many not so good things to talk about, but talking of the good things, I think we really came up with really, really innovative initiatives. So say, how do we then reach out to these women in the community? How do we help them become the ambassadors, the facilitators of learning for children who do not have access to technology? And there was this clear segmentation that we did, that children in urban areas who have access to smartphones but don't have internet, who have internet, who do not have device itself, and then targeted interventions, because not serving one is not a choice, and especially in the sector that we operate with. So I thought that was something really a nice part of this pandemic that we were subjected to. The second thing is what Aishna also touched upon, the openness. The people that we are working with, right from government officials in the State Department, people who would make us wait for like 3 hours for a 45-minute meeting are now available on Zoom for calls and meetings. That's wonderful. Nothing could have pushed government officials to behave in this manner. And then parents, now they are coming on Zoom call. We did a virtual parent-teachers meeting in Punjab for parents of government school children. And they came on Zoom. 80% of them actually came on Zoom, or teachers were calling them on phone. And they felt so happy about it. It was like, oh, I'm doing something that only rich could, or people who have developed could do. So there's also this sense of achievement. I think in our work, the good part is that we have been able to channelize that novelty around this, and hence are able to move things. Can it be better? Yes, always. Should COVID have forced us into this? Not necessarily, but I'm glad that we are doing what we are able to do.
So Khushbu, a lot of pointers from what you said. I'm going to get Rachita to first talk about how the last 3 months have been for her, and then we'll come back to to something that you mentioned. Rachita.
Yeah, Reshma. So I will not reiterate the challenges and the good points that Reshma and Khushbu said. I echo them completely when it comes to parents and children and the limited thing that technology has. Of course, India is not a developed nation, so you cannot reach everyone just with internet. When we started this year, back then we had conceived in 2018, we had conceived the Earth Ambassadors program, and 2020 to 2030 is the decade for ecological restoration by UN, and it was just the right year for us to kickstart something really amazing. And we were about to wrap up our the last year's fellowship, and we had already selected candidates for the next year, and there are some amazing people on the list and on the cohort, educators from all over India, and it was amazing. But this thing just it took us a lot of time, and we had to come from Chennai to to a small town where we are right now, to my husband's place, and the disconnect from our team, sudden disconnect, and our entire team is scattered in different places. Everybody was traveling and they got stuck wherever they were, and we literally packed 4 clothes and we came, and it took us a week or 2 to understand what we are going through, and this is not short term. So it was really difficult to understand. And even though we adapted, we started building curriculum online, it needs people in all grassroots places to be able to take that to places where you don't have technology. We can't do without social interaction. We can't do without it. It's really tough. But now we are helping a school to set up their technology for the first time, their computer labs, and so that we can interact with teachers and how teachers can take it forward from there. So these are the couple of adaptations that we did, and East West Center in Hawaii was offering a change leadership course that really transformed my my sense of understanding of this pandemic at a global level, and how far it is going to go, and what all we have to do in this year to keep on adapting constantly, and what all we had planned for this decade is not going to work. Even, I mean, forget the year is just, I feel like the year is gone, and it's nothing is going to happen whatever we planned. But the positive thing is that the problems that we were able to see, now people are able to see those problems. I felt that I feel that people in social sector are more aware of the problems. It can be an opinion, but I feel that we deal with so many things in day-to-day life that we are more aware of the problems. And suddenly, when COVID hit, people could see these, people who are daily wage workers traveling from one place to other place. I am also a migrant worker. I mean, there's no difference between me and them apart from my privilege that I have. And I had sleepless nights seeing those people who belong from the same state as mine have to walk all the way from South India to back home. So I feel more people started talking about the problems. I really see that this as a positive opportunity, that people are now able to see that there are issues that have to be fixed in a more sustainable way than just reacting to a problem. And the issue is that all the other issues got submerged in COVID. Nothing else was given priority, except people were giving donations only for COVID response. People were raising funds only for COVID response. There was nothing that was left for me to even crowdfund. I felt that I didn't have space to raise my voice for education anymore for a few months. Of course, I can do it now, but now that people have settled down. But earlier, I felt that if I ask people to stand up for education, it would be very foolish. It would be like, okay, the whole world is suffering from something and you're asking money for this. So I really felt that this was the bad part, and the good part was that everybody could see these issues very close and they are real, but it got exposed much more because of COVID.
And do you think that because of this, crisis, so, a lot of the work around the nonprofit space, in any case, struggled for, recognition and relevance in the past, right? And it's become even more so. But I remember one of you talked about how, your friends now understand how frugality can actually go a long way, and that's a virtue or a value that they felt, is something that they could learn from you. But what do you see, this entire crisis being made as this is going to be a transformation for the sector? It's made a lot of the unseen and the invisible visible. You cannot choose to not respond to it, right? And the migrant crisis, of course, has been a big trigger, but then there have been other aspects of the crisis as well. Do you think this is wishful thinking, or is this realistic? And as you actually now buckle down to the real challenges that you see in your organizations, what are you seeing has shifted for good, right? And where are you a little worried as well?
I think for most of us, even our worst case scenario did not include this worst case scenario,
Yeah.
So one very good thing that's happened is that we've been pushed to reimagine like never before. So that's, I think, possibly something good that has come out for each of us to be mentally more stimulating, shift back and now actually see things in totality, and not be in our own bubble of, just, whatever this thing I am doing is going to be enough. A lot of it is virtual thinking. I will not lie, because a lot of conversations that are happening and a lot of people who are influencing these conversations, initiating these conversations, are still people with not complete grassroots exposure, I'd say. So a lot of it, when it's spoken and when we hear about it, it still remains estimates and it still remains calculations. A lot of it is reality as well. There is no challenging the fact that every sector will undergo a transformation. And while some sectors will revive back because they're more structured, they're more recognized, they generally have more backing, will probably thrive back sooner. Social sector has always been under-recognized, and at least in our country, I'll say, has been underused. No matter how many social startups we have and no matter how many social workers we have, we're not still seen as essential workers. And that came out in light when the pandemic happened. When we saw the list of essential services, my first thought was, why are they not? I mean, while they're saying that, yes, people who are working in health sector, NGOs who are working in health sector are definitely health essential workers. But my first instance was, do they realize that we perhaps have the most human interaction, which will actually be of a lot of use right now if you want to optimize on that? Now would be a great time to bring people from social sector and sort of figure out how can you position them into this entire crisis management situation, which has not totally happened. So that for our sector, it's not that we were not going through challenges. As a social entrepreneur, I was already struggling with so many things. We were already bootstrapping at times. Now it's just that it's a shared challenge with everyone across, and it poses a great threat to startups, especially like mine, which are based in 2-tier, 3-tier cities, which have a lot to do with commitments in which have, a lot of our funding is based on verbal commitment. I've not still completed my 3 years. I'm still not CSR eligible. So for me, it has taken, personally, it's taken a big setback. As Rachita mentioned, this was a year for most of us where we were looking for stabilizing, because we'd worked for a couple of years. We had a hang of what we were doing and what direction we wanted to move in. So this year was very, very instrumental for a lot of us, and the entire year has disappeared in a sense. And one small thing that I'd leave before I complete this is that, for people like me who have fear of time, this is like the worst thing that could have happened, where we've completely lost track of time, control of time, no idea. So yes, I think social sector, it will transform. How positively, how challengingly is something yet to be seen, I guess.
Kushbu, I want to draw into something that you and a couple of your friends did, and I also wondered that you don 2 hats as co-founder of your nonprofit and the CEO of Shiksha Lokam, and you decided to do Reality Check, which was a series of ground up stories from people who were at the front line of the crisis. First and foremost, why did you even bother to do that? Because you had your hands full just trying to keep your own organization afloat. But what was the motivation for you to actually do that? And how do you see Reality Check as a series, shaping some of the relevance? As Aishna said, social workers are actually essential workers in this country.
So, I've always struggled to come with terms with this phrase that a plate is full, because I don't even know what is the size of my plate. So it's only when you feel very strongly about something, I think it's all a matter of priorities. When you see something and you feel for it so strongly, I think calendars are just very flexible around it. So I think Reality Check was, people nowadays are talking about webinar fatigue. They're like, there should be a no webinar day or something like that. I mean, jokes apart, I really feel that there have been too many conversations, and I guess Aishna also touched upon it, but very few voices from the actual people who are working on the ground. There's very few platforms that actually allow these people to come and talk, because it requires a lot of working with them, saying them that it's okay, it's a safe space, you can talk. So it's very easy for someone to say that so many lakh migrant workers are moving on feet and going to their hometown, versus somebody telling a story that, I saw this group of thousands of workers left stranded right outside my door at this junction, and now they are left without food, without any passes to move around, no vehicles. So, and that's the reality. And if not for this person who was right there to help them, who mobilized resources to support them, these people would have been, part of another national level statistics. So I think Reality Check for me was personally that these voices have to be heard, and they have to be heard not from some proxy. They have to speak for themselves. And I think that's all. I mean, it was just a priority, and I felt for it. And so I had to do it. There was just no other way. There was no option.
So for some of the people on this call who also may not even know about Reality Check, what was the whole idea behind it? And what surprised you from the response you got from the series as well?
Okay, the idea of Reality Check was pretty simple. It just, a group of friends. It was just a social media banter, like you crib. And you crib so much, and then you say, if you're cribbing so much, why aren't you doing something about it? And we have been very fortunate to have very good mentors. I mean, I personally feel my life can be a case study on serendipity. You know, I've always found the right people to nudge me in the right direction whenever I was at a crossroad. So here also, just, you know, a common mentor, he just said, you know, why don't you create a platform? You are in a position, why don't you host one? And we said, yes, nice idea. And it's just about getting onto some calls at 9 o'clock in the night or 11 o'clock in the night, but you know, let's do it if you feel so strong about it. And so to curate that whole set of speakers, to find even to the extreme, you know, and I would say the friends who were part of this organizing group, they were even more, you know, particular about it, that are they really working on ground, or are we, you know, or are they just speaking about it? So doing all the background checks, all the thing, it was such a meaningful experience, such an enriching experience. And the response was something that really took me by surprise. I honestly, I didn't expect. I was like, even if 10 people hear it, you know, our job is done. But we were surprised. We had around some 3,000 odd views for every single episode of Reality Check. And that means that gives me hope that there are people who are wanting to listen, who want to know what's happening. We just have to reach out to them. And so I think for me, it was a very encouraging experience to say that in future, I would again do it. And such creativity is what will keep me alive, to say what else can we do? You know, how do we make use of our own privileges? I mean, that was my takeaway from the whole episode.
Thanks, Khushbu. Rachita, you know, while you were again with your feet firmly in environment, but you also looked at the issues around mental health during the last couple of months, right? So, you know, why don't you talk to us about what you did, and you know, in some ways, most of you stepped out of your silos, right? And as Aishna said, that I can no longer be only about education, right? I have to understand that there is a larger context in which my, you know, communities live, and I have to be out there, you know, to address it. And Khushbu's part was also really about the fact that, you know, why aren't we doing something about it? If it bothers us so much, why aren't we doing something about it? What made you actually, you know, look at this as a space to also ensure that there were counselors available and you had this intervention around mental health?
Yeah, so to give a little background of why I did that, because I don't see education as something that is a specific. It's a space that can be, you know, used to talk about each and everything. And growing up, I had a lot of questions and a lot of discomforts with a lot of things that happened in our country and how our society functions. So even though I feel so strongly about environment and nature and ecology, I feel nature has the power to embrace all, and we have all come from nature. The only reason I started this initiative, or I'm a part of this initiative, because I see that the gap is so high, and mental health is something that I feel I've always gotten so much strength from nature. So it has helped me be sane. And so I reached out to a couple of friends and I asked them, you know, I want to do this. And I asked my team if I want to do this. And we all are so unanimously, we said, yes, let's do this. Even though we always talk about ecology and its importance, let us actually highlight a space that that is so important for us as educators and for us as nonprofit, working in the nonprofit sector. And the conversations that came out of it were amazing. We connected with some amazing artists who draw nature for peace, for finding themselves. And you know, even in the process, I got inspired and I sketched a couple of things, and it gave me so much joy. And be it photographing nature, be it just being around green spaces, and I mean, those spaces are so rare these days. It's very unfortunate. So, and a lot of other stories came up from this campaign that you know, we have tried to find voices where people you know, there are a lot of spaces that people can talk about their mental health, but it holds such stigma. It holds such I'm even short of words to explain how one would come out and talk about how they are feeling right now, even though it can be just short-lived. if my mental state, which is disturbed or which is not so good, if it's short-lived just because of this pandemic as well, which so many people are so new to it and they don't know why is this happening to them. At times I have felt suffocated, even though I have amazing family, amazing partner, I have amazing parents, or everything is so good. And I just find happiness when I just interact with my pet, or when I interact with a mango tree that is in my backyard right now. So sometimes, even though people are great, they are unable to help and they're unable to listen. So we wanted to talk about how you can listen to your inner voice and how nature can actually help you find yourself again. So that is the whole idea. It's a little abstract when I say this, but I feel it gives space to people who actually specifically find happiness in solace and in solitude and just being with themselves and making art or listening to songs and stuff. So yeah.
What struck me, and I've been a part of some of these conversations, and especially the ones that have happened in March, April, and May. And people have really talked about how tough and hard it has been for themselves. What's very striking is that you've talked about joy, you've talked about connection, you've talked about all of these values, which I have to say I'm hearing for the first time in the series of conversations that I've been part of. So where do you draw your strength from? What gives you so much hope? You're dealing with some serious stuff, right? I'm assuming that your organizations are were gearing up for growth, but are now going to be looking at survival. You've made large personal commitments to be in this profession as well. What gives you so much hope? Why are you so happy?
I think initially when when we came here, and I am a person, and I think Ishna will know that I don't like talking so much. But when I share, I end up sharing so much because I believe so much in people. Because I have seen when at certain times I choose not to talk, but when I have spoken out, when I have taken that leap of faith to share, I have gotten reciprocation. I've gotten ears to hear me out. I have also gotten people who have shared their really tough times and really difficult phases that they're going through with me, which they could or could not. I mean, it's everybody's choice, and they've believed in me. Whenever we have taken a step as an organization, parents have come forward, principals have come forward, children have come forward, donors have come forward. So as much as a lot of people believe that our planet is going to burst 7.5 billion people, I feel we are 7.5 billion strong. So the more people are there, the more people there are to bring about change. And that is why not only I want to connect with a lot of children and their parents, I want to tap into the conversations from youth and how young people see their lives unfolding in this scenario. And that is where I find hope, because a lot of young people are unemployed right now. And a lot of people in my friend circle are also thinking of quitting their jobs in this scenario. So I have no clue what to say, what to tell them, whether to go ahead or to not go ahead, because I feel it's a blessing to even have a regular salary coming in every month in this time. But then I feel when I had to hear my calling, and when I was on that crossroad, I went ahead and I did that, and I'm extremely happy, even though sometimes I struggle with money, or sometimes I struggle with making people understand what am I doing, how am I doing it, and where does the money come from, because the profits, the sector says non-profit, but the profit is not economy, the profit is the joy. So it is not a non-profit sector, it's really profitable that way if I look at it like that. So yeah. So that's where my hope lies. We are 7.5 billion strong, and I hope to reach India, then Asia, and probably the whole world one day. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachita. Thank you. Khushbu, these are tough times.
So, my husband and my partner in work, he always says that in social sector, we are all salesperson of hope. All of us are engaging with such complex, convoluted topics. We see grief, sadness every single day. And that's the truth. So we can only mobilize people, whether stakeholders that we are working with or even donors who are supporting us, only when we instill hope in people. And how can you instill hope in people if you yourself are not hopeful? So I think by design, all social sector people become optimists. We have to start believing in a better world, in the possibility that things can get better. And there's always bright side. You go to this field and you see, and I share this story with, and Aishna knows the person. There's this young lady who works in Kargil. And they have been seeing lockdown for such a long time. And we asked her, why do you work? And she says, children are still preparing for exams. If I don't work for them, who will? I mean, they have not lost hope on their future. Then why should we? I think it's the same thing for me. And I would, I have so many such stories. Like I said, in my earlier response, we reached out to these mothers and we said, why can't you teach your children? We will help you facilitate learning experiences, but will you do that extra bit? And they readily agreed. We, when our suddenly this lockdown was announced and we are into education, but our children come from migrant families. Their families had no ration. We didn't know how to support them. We were not into food distribution, but then we found people who were ready to support us in doing that. In fact, right now we are running a campaign with our corporate volunteers to say, why don't you just give 1 hour per day to teach children one-on-one? And then we found volunteers. There are so many of them who have just signed up for this. I think people hugely underestimate what they as individuals can do. These small steps, if each one of us can work with that one problem in our vicinity, the problem would be solved, right? So I deeply believe in that. And I have, like, I think even Rachita said, I have deep faith in our ability as human beings, as a society to overcome any crisis. We have emerged in the past, we will evolve even now. And there are things that we may not be very proud of as a species, what we have done. But I think deep down, all of us and many of us still care. And they just need that first step. We are so comfortable in our zones. And if somebody can give us that first step, that this is a tiny thing you would do and you would be able to help, I think people are ready to help. And, I personally believe that hope is a very renewable source of energy, and there can't be this one constant source of hope. I mean, obviously your family is there. For me, it's my family, my husband. They are constantly there to support. And but then yes, keep finding newer sources of hope. And one day you run out of it. The second day you found another fresh source which is bubbling with energy to give you hope. I think I keep looking out for sources. There's no one fixed source.
Thanks, Khushbu. Aishna. Sorry, Aishna. I think Aishna's probably got some audio issues. Aishna, can you hear us? Okay, I'll just try and see what's going on with Aishna so that we can get back to her. Rachita and Khushbu, we've all got friends, peers, family who are not from this world, right? Who are not from the nonprofit world. But I think a lot of the conversations at home, at work, have also got to be about a lot of guilt that people are facing, right? So many people who've chosen a certain path in life today are actually uneasy and uncomfortable with their privilege, right? And if they were to have a conversation with you, what would you tell them?
Can I go first?
Rachita's like, I was raring for this.
Because I am preparing a list of things that everybody can do, irrespective of their vocation. And it's a golden question that you've asked, Reshma, because I strongly believe that everybody can contribute. Every single person who has money, who doesn't have money, doesn't depend on whether they have money or not, whether they have skills or not, because we are there to help with skills, knowledge, even attitude building, leadership. So, it's a golden question for me, because this is exactly that I'm working. It's exactly something that I'm working on. And I believe if anybody wants to reach me out at YouCanEdu on Instagram, I would tell them what they can do exactly according to their vocation and their time, and how much time they can give, how much, what are the areas of their interest. So specifically, we want to support people who are really willing to contribute in different ways and different kind of capitals, intelligence capital or time capital or the M capital, whatever capital. Yeah.
Khushbu. And Rachita, by the way, when are you releasing that list? Because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of takers for that list.
Yeah, I think I have to release it immediately now that I've asked the question, and I'll keep adding on to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's a list that a lot of us are going to be very keen to see.
Thanks.
I would, in fact, just add on to what Rachita said. In our work, in education, and I'm sure for many other domains, we have a term called appreciative inquiry. We always focus too much on the things that we don't have. For example, if you're working in a high-profile corporate job, you say, I don't have time. But then you got money. For people who are not so, so busy in their everyday life, they may not have money to contribute, but they will have time. So if we can just focus as individuals at what is it that I have education. I can maybe just take out 1 hour for the child next door, or I can just take out this, or I have this ability to storytell. Can I write? I love writing. Can I just write? Can I draw? I don't know. Leverage what you have and just use it for the issue that you feel so strongly about. Not everybody has to believe or has to feel for education. Not everybody has to feel for migrants. Somebody can feel for ecosystem, for environment, for the stray dogs. I don't know, but whatever that, if people can just start looking inside to say that what do I care about, and hence what can I take out from my lifestyle to contribute towards that. I think these individual steps are what matters. And then obviously Rachita's list will be very handy.
Absolutely. Yes. Aishna.
I think hope is a very stubborn word. If you are not feeling it, you have to find it. And one great, something great that has happened in these past 2-3 months is that I have seen so many people personally pursuing things that they didn't even know that they were good at. And I have seen people, recognize issues or just see people who are invisible to them, and all of this gives me immense hope. And I think, as Rachita and as Khushbu said, we operate on hope. There is no other way. I mean, all of us do things because we believe in the possibility of change. We believe that there is something good that can be done and that can be identified. We complete our existence of work operates on that belief. So it gives me hope to also it gives me hope that it's a shared crisis. It's not any one person's crisis, it's not any one sector or organization's crisis. It's a crisis that's hit the humanity, and we've seen so many empowering conversations that have resulted out of this. So I think having that whole space to pause, reflect. I personally have reflected more than I've ever had in my 27, 28 years of life, in these past 2-3 months. And to know that a lot of people are with me on this, again, gives me a lot of hope. So, yeah. And also, as Khushbu said, I think we sort of underestimate small steps. We underestimate small work. We are so in our head, we want everything to be so impactful, and impact for us is such a big word. And unless we see big numbers or we see some large scale impact, we really underestimate small steps. So I think I'm also looking forward to Rachita's list, because as she said, there's something for everybody. So I think we just need to figure out that one thing that we can do, no matter how small, that one cause that we feel, even if it is not a cause, even if we do not see it from that lens, we see it more personally, and we see that if not anything, I'm going to make my parents happy, and then I'm going to make myself happy. I think it's a big, I don't think that's a small thing to say or do.
I just add to what Aishna said.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
this joy of giving. I mean, I know it has become very cliched as a phrase today, but I think it's very addictive. It's when you start doing that thing beyond your comfort zone, and then you derive that joy that, in the earlier question, Rachita and Aishna both spoke about. I think that joy then pushes you to do more. And then there's no bound. You don't, I mean, as humans, anyways, we don't have any bound, but we just create that artificial boundary. I think these small acts really pushes us to do those, to redefine our boundary.
So let me ask this question: why haven't we been doing this then? If it was such a, if this was the universal truth, right, in the sense that everyone can do something, it just takes a little step. The joy of giving is universal. Um, we're not a particularly giving society. It's hard to get people to even step out to help, right? So why haven't we been doing it?
I feel because we know it, but it's not become a way of life yet for everybody. I'll probably redirect to my own story. When I was growing up and I came back and I once told my father, and I was very young, and I said, I really like this helping thing. Every parent, they teach you to help others. I'm like, I completely enjoy, and I want to know if I can make a career out of it. If there's something I can work and do for the rest of my life. And my father's like, go figure. And when I decided to start my startup, there was such harsh, misinformed, insensitive reactions that came around, indifferent also, because what we are talking about and what most of us are doing as a full-time job is considered as a hobby. People keep the joy of giving is also positioned in their life for their free time. So it's not something that they want to practice as an active way of being. So when I said and I was 25, and they're like, you can do this after 50. Why don't you like earn while you can and do this after 50? It's more of a post retirement thing. Or you can do, companies have these employee engagement programs. You can always opt for it. So there were so many mixed responses that came. And then there was another very different kind of response that I'm sure all of us on the panel will, as women, will resonate with, where a lot of people were not even expecting me to work. I come from a privileged background. Work is seen as not a scope for growth, but more to, just earn money and just be financially secured. And if you come from a position where you're fairly secured, a lot of people just look up to you and like, they're like, why do you even bother? So a lot of people were not expecting me to be so aspirational and all. And that is something that it's a very different dimension to bring in. But a lot of people, because they're made to feel that way, feel that they don't have much to give, which especially it could be women, it could be just it could be anybody really. So the minute you plug that thought in, saying that you don't have to or you can't, is also what's also keeping a lot of people back from even trying out to do something like this.
For someone who claims to be the youngest on the panel, Ashta, that would have taken a lot of people, many studies and researchers to unearth as an insight. And actually, it's very valuable. It is the kind of signaling that we keep getting, that it is a nice to do thing, and it's not what you need to do because you're part of a society, because you're part of a community, because you're part of a of a family. So thank you. That was actually it occurred to me that there's just so much of messaging around discouraging people, and that's probably why we don't see so much of it.
I'd also like to quickly add, you very rightly pointed out that it's been boxed as a feel-good action, and what people don't realize is that it's not always a feel-good. Not all of us at the end of the day, despite I sometimes work with children who I don't even know, they have no aspiration. And that's when you see that in a child. As a child, I was full of just hope. I never thought that I couldn't do anything. I used to fail at science and still believe that I could be an astronaut if I wanted to. And when you see and when you work with people who can't even dream about anything, who do not have any plans for themselves, I won't say that it makes me feel good to always be working with them. It's sometimes so uncomfortable, it's sometimes so draining. But the whole point that I keep telling people is that try and find a way to overcome that initial threshold, and do not put a condition that you do it because it feels good. You have to do it because it's right, because it's for a larger good. So I think that's something that I hope a lot of my friends are watching. Please, guys.
Khushbu, why aren't we doing it? It's just so simple. It was all about a small step. Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't more people doing it?
I think I'll build on what Aishna said. I completely still stand by the fact that it's only the small steps that actually lead you to that big leap. And again, if I connect it back to my story to say that, it was not that one day I woke up and I said, bus up, I'll be into it and I'll do this. No, I think it's a series of small choices. It's first you do this. I said, I have my weekday packed, but what can I do differently in my weekends? And then from there on, you meet new people, you get new perspectives. I think people have a very strong influence on people around us, with different perspectives, with same perspectives, people who strengthen your belief, people who question your belief, both are important. Friction is very healthy. And again, a person I deeply admire, he always says that, if friction was not there, you wouldn't have even able to walk. So I think those people who say the negative things also make you question your beliefs and then make it more strong. Because you have answered it in your mind 1,000 times to say, why am I doing what I'm doing? And if I believe so strongly into it, I will, no matter what comes, I will still act on it. And I think that about the courage, like Aishna said, it's not always a bag of joys. I think if I look into my journey of last 7 years, it's a lot to do with those tiny arguments, those small arguments back at home with your loved ones, with your parents, to say, no, I don't believe in what you believe. But then it requires conversation, right? You can't skip those conversations. When we skip those conversations, that's when the chasm just builds up. I think as people who have chosen this path, I would say that I speak for myself. I deeply believe in the perspectives that people bring. Even when a corporate friend of mine, when she says that, all this good doesn't hold true, you should earn money and enjoy your life because we get birth one time. I respect her perspective, but I engage in conversation to let her see why I'm seeing things differently. And I think it helps because it builds mutual respect. What happens is when you just rebuke people to say that, you are the greedy one, you are the capitalist. We shouldn't label people. Sometimes in development sector, we also end up doing things that we don't like others to do. Labeling is not only the other side of the table. We also indulge in a lot of labeling. So I think we have to come together as a species to say what is the right way, and right is not the same for everybody, and that's perfectly okay. I think I believe in that, and that's why maybe many of them are not doing it, but our duty is to keep giving them options and making those to-do lists that Rachita is working on.
Absolutely. I think Rachita's kind of made it easy for everyone. Yeah. So Rachita, I almost think that Rachita's responsibility, guys. That's why I made the list. People were not doing enough, so I thought I'll just make the list, and now everyone will run out of excuses. Why not? But Rachita, quick, last couple of comments from you in terms of why you believe that if we are 7.5 billion strong, why haven't we done enough?
I think as a species, we were hunter-gatherers, so we know how to gather very well, but we don't know how to disperse things that we have and give out our capital properly. But as much as I believe on our instincts of gathering, I believe that a society needs equilibrium. And because there are people from our sector, we also need people who are philanthropists, who have worked hard and earned that kind of money to be able to give us. So there is an ecosystem, there is a give and take, there all kinds of people are needed. And when I was contributing in a corporate sector as an educator, when I was training so many young people and troubleshooting so many people's code, I realized it matters so much to them when I was helping them troubleshoot that. So that one program that they write is going to give them promotion, and when they get promotion, they can go abroad, they can have a better life, and they can raise their children in better environment. So there are multiple stories related to all kinds of professions that people choose. And if they want to do space research, or if they want to do anything that has to do earning big, or if they want to become a film actor or whatever, everybody can contribute to their cause that they want to contribute to. And society needs equilibrium. If everybody is on our side of the table, then who would be on the other side of the table? So we need everybody. Politicians are needed, entrepreneurs are needed, social entrepreneurs are needed, and so are social workers. So everybody has their role, and I think that won't culminate my answer for why people are not giving enough. I think they don't know where they can give, and they don't realize their skills. They don't realize the capital that they have, because we have frugal minds and we think, okay, money is the only thing that we can give, but that's not true. There are other things that we can give. So I think it's just making them realize that they can give something that is other than money also. Yeah. So
No, thanks so much, Rachita. It's the beginning of the week, and I check in with my team, and I told them yesterday that I'm kind of feeling a little, low myself in terms of energy, right? It kind of takes a whole lot to kind of look at another Monday in the face and say, let's get on with this week. But I want to thank each of you, because you've been a source of immense energy and, really very, very powerful insights. I think one of the key things that I take away is that, it is about taking those small steps, and the small steps towards inclusion, towards, people who get left behind. The fact that no one should ideally be left behind, right? So even if you're working for that one, it's not about the scale at which you're trying to do it, but it's the fact that you are, in fact, doing something about making it a better place for at least one more human life. And Rachita, we look forward to your list. I think it's going to solve humanity's problems. And, we will be your ambassadors, and we'll make sure that it really travels far and wide. There's no pressure on you, but we just thought we'd put our expectations up front. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, Rachita, Khushbu, Aishna. More power to three of you. And, look forward to actually meeting you in person on the other side.
Same here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was lovely. Thank you.